that the World Bank, this is my third observation, people think that oil revenues are going to continuously increase. There is evidence, and it's been now brought before the World Bank in a conference. I asked the bank if they minded if I I don't know why I bothered asking them, because it is public record now, that a number of experts are saying that there is a gross overestimate as to how much oil is in the ground, and in fact, within 4 or 5 years, the oil revenues will level off and then begin to decline. Now, I'm not an expert in oil exploration, so I do not know to what degree this is accurate, but normally people don't make statements like that unless there's some evidence for it. And that is going to be a serious risk for the North and the South, because they've built up patrimonial systems where people are dependent on these jobs for their survival. The massive increase in the size of Juba from 100,000 to 1.2 million in the last 3 years are principally a function of an oil economy being created through people's salaries. There's 300,000 cell phones, for example, in the South right now. How do you think that happened just in 3 years? It happened because people are getting salaries and they're buying things with it. They've created a consumer economy, and there's a huge small business class that's been created from East Africa that is running the southern economy. And my taxi cab driver, we rented the car for 2 weeks we were there, and I said, "You're making a lot of money?" He's a Kikuyu from Kenya, the entrepreneurial tribe, most entrepreneurial tribe of Kenya. And he said, "Well, Mr. Natsios, we were making a lot of money up front, but everybody's coming in here now, so all the prices are dropping. Our profit margins are very, very narrow. So we're really struggling." I said, "That's good for the Southerners, because the prices are going down, and that's the way a free market's supposed to work." And I did ask him something which is very interesting. I know this is being recorded, so I have to be careful. But I said, "How is it in Kenya with, bribes?" He said, "Well, if you want to get a permit, you have to pay a bribe, or they won't give it to you. In the South, they ask you for one. If you don't pay it, which I refuse to pay, they give you the permit anyway." So there may be some petty corruption, but the level of predatory behavior isn't there. And it's very interesting. Nancy Birzdall, who's the founder and president of the Center for Global Development, wrote a very interesting paper which she delivered at the World Bank in 1993 or 4 at a conference on hunger, which I attended when I was vice president of World Vision. And she said one of the theories for the development of the East African tigers, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, Malaysia, to a lesser degree Thailand and Indonesia, but they all developed at a highly rapid rate in the 60s and 70s. Very interesting what she said. Because of the threat of Maoist insurgencies in all these countries, the looming threat of this massive power, the elites let control, the oligarchies that run every country, let go of the economy sufficiently to stimulate economic growth. Because if they didn't, that they could have rebellions in the rural areas, just as Chiang Kai-shek was unseated, and then in China he went to Taiwan, he said, "I can't let this happen again." The two best countries of distribution of wealth in the world, you know what they are? South Korea and Taiwan. The 3 most successful land reforms in the history of the world: South Korea, Taiwan, and Japan under MacArthur. That's a little different. But why did land reform take place? Because the elite said, "You've got to do rural development or we're going to have insurgencies." I argue that the reason I am more confident than most people are in the South is not because they're all my friends and I've been with them all. It's because of the looming threat of the Arabs in the North undermining the South sufficiently that the Southerners will structurally push more money into the rural areas than any African country has done since they achieved independence. In a very odd way, the Arabs in Khartoum, the more extreme elements, because it will be a continuing threat for decades, may in fact achieve the reforms that many African states have refused to undertake, because that's just not how people behave in any country. The elites, once they get control, they don't let go, except if there's an outside threat. That's what Birzdall's argument is. And I would apply that argument to southern Sudan. I saw evidence of it on this trip. When we were in Upper Nile, in Malakal, I met the new governor who had just been elected. The roads were horrific. It's because of that soil, that cotton soil. And as we left, I said, why can't someone fix it? No one's fixed it for 150 years. Why would they fix it now? All of a sudden, as we left, Mike and I left, and Lucy, and we noticed trucks, construction trucks, lined up along the Nile River that had been brought down by barges, and backhoes. They're about to rebuild the road structure, the road infrastructure of the city. I said, why are they doing that? They said, because they've got to show improvement in the provincial cities and the rural areas, or the NCP is going to make headway, because there'll be dissolution in the rural areas. So I actually think that there's more likelihood of stability in the south than there is in the north. There is evidence already of discussions taking place between the rebel movements of Darfur, Abdelaziz's forces in the Nuba Mountains, the Beja Congress in the Red Sea province, and Malik Gagar's people, and even talk now of unrest in the Gezira irrigation area. The government canceled a whole series of development programs to reconstruct this 80-year-old, 70-year-old irrigation scheme, because it really hasn't been developed that well. It needs to be rebuilt. They cancel all the loans, move them all north of Khartoum. The former Minister of Finance in the Sudanese government, Hamdi, who's a major figure in the NCP, gave a speech. It was leaked out. Astonishing speech, in which he said, we have lost Darfur, we've lost the south, forget about them. Concentrate all the money in the three cities, Omdurman, Khartoum, North Khartoum, and north of the, and of course the port, they need the port in Red Sea province, and then between the Khartoum and the Egyptian border, there's been massive development in the last 4 years. Why is that? Because they're following Hamdi's advice. They're circling the wagons around the Arab Triangle, literally, in a very literal sense. There's been massive development in that area to try to, as the country collapses around them and destabilizes, at least they believe they're going to have a stable center. I don't think it can possibly be stable. The other illusion of this is that the North is growing stronger. I've been arguing, obviously, just the last few minutes against that. But the evidence of the vulnerability of the NCP, in my view, is so extensive now, it's difficult for me to imagine anybody who knows what's happening in the North arguing that the NCP is this powerful force that's threatening the internal forces in the country. In fact, it's the opposite. They are on the defensive, they're in the corner, and they're acting in a very defensive way. The thing that convinced me is the astonishing thing that happened in April of 2008. When the attack on Omdurman took place by Khalil Ibrahim's forces, the GEM, 1,000, 2,000 troops on 125, depending on which account you believe, went across, and I actually calculated the number of miles, 700 miles, because they came from Chad. We know they were armed by Deby in retaliation for the attempt by the NIS to unseat him earlier in the year. This was his retaliation. But the fact that they got to the bridge across the Nile River through North Khartoum, I just think it's astonishing, through Omdurman. Two people who live in Omdurman said it's very interesting the route they took. They took the route through the principal neighborhoods of support for Sadiq al-Mahdi and Hassan al-Turabi. They were Islamist areas. Why did they go through those areas? The discussion that a number of friends of mine have had, and these are security experts from outside the country, they're Western diplomats, they're international figures, and they're Southerners and some Northerners, is that Khalil was talking with Hassan al-Turabi. Turabi's an old man, he's not direct, he doesn't have massive forces, but he has a fanatical following. One of the things I did when I was envoy is I got briefings, some of them 2 or 3 hours long, by the intelligence services, and I won't tell you which countries because I don't want to compromise my sources. They know more in the neighboring countries, for a very good reason, because they're affected by it more directly than we are, on what's going on in Sudan. And they said to me, you don't realize this, but Turabi was very shrewd. 50% of the officer corps of the Sudanese army were personally recruited by Turabi. He interviewed them individually, he chose them, and he put them in power. Why has there been repeated purges in the Sudanese military and the officer corps? because they don't trust their own military. They've hired a South African executive security agency, retired commandos from the South African Army, to give them advice on how to prevent a coup. You know how many troops there are of the Sudanese army in the 3 cities? Omdurman, Khartoum, and North Khartoum? 4,000. Why is that? It's because they don't trust the army. They're afraid if the army is in the city, there'll be a coup. Why is it that the army was not used to put down Jem's attack on the city? Because they were afraid if they came in the city, they weren't sure whether they'd take the regime out or stop Jem. I think part of, and this is this part of his speculation that I'm just saying now, I think the reason they've arrayed their forces along the border is they'd rather have the guns pointed at a threat in the south rather than at the regime. They do not trust their own military. And that is very dangerous in any state where the political leaders don't trust their own military. So, people who don't like the NCP, I certainly don't like them, they're a brutal regime, they've killed hundreds of thousands of people. In fact, if you count the 2.5 million people who have died in the south, although Sadiq al-Mahdi killed a lot of those people too, it's a brutal regime. But the assumption in the West that a coup will bring to power more progressive, humane forces in Sudan, in my view, is delusional. I see no Thomas Jefferson waiting in the wings with a large following with a lot of guns who's going to take power in the north. All the Southerners I talked to said those are naive Americans who say things like that. Any coup will probably bring a worse regime than we have right now. At least Bashir signed the agreement. At least Bashir signed the agreement. Taha signed the agreement. And in fact, Bashir privately has told me on more than one occasion, he said publicly, and he told other Arab leaders, he's proud of the CPA. He doesn't say that now because he's under so much attack for having let the South go. But the effect the effect of all this is we could have a failed state in the north, and the question is what will happen if that takes place. It will be an unmitigated disaster for the region, for the people of the north. I think it's very unlikely it's going to happen, but a set of agreements that would lead to we're not going to have a democratic regime in the north anytime soon, but having a gradual relaxation of the repression, an attempt to work out some political agreements in Darfur, in the Nuba Mountains, in the Gezira area, in the Red Sea province, in Upper Nile, of sharing power and wealth, the way the CPA was actually originally designed, because the CPA does not just affect the South. It was supposed to decentralize wealth sharing in the North as well, and that was never done. I remember when the documents were held up in the finance ministry, because senior people in the NCP refused to let it have it happen. Is the North, some Southerners think, this is my last point because I think I'm over time here substantially, is there a secret plan for the North to invade the South? And the answer is no. They're posturing. They're both playing brinkmanship with each other because what Bashir really wants is a sweeter deal. In fact, I heard a quote from a person close to him. We want a sweeter deal, and the reason we want it is because we're afraid of implosion in the North. We want a deal on sharing of water of the Nile River. We want a deal on sharing of oil revenues. We want a deal on, most importantly, interestingly enough, sharing of debt. Because $6 or $7 billion of the northern debt, they have very heavy debt in the north, is directly a result of the oil infrastructure. And they say, why should we take all the burden if the Southerners are going to be using all of this infrastructure we built? They should be taking part of this. And the West might well retire the debt. If the South has it, they'll never retire the debt of the North if the debt stays there. These issues they want settled before the referendum, so they can use the referendum, of course, as a bargaining tool. And the Southerners, properly so, are saying, we have no intention of renegotiating something that was agreed to in the CPA. Why are we even discussing this? The legislation's passed the National Assembly. Why are we redebating this? So, I think what we should do, frankly, at this point, is focus on strengthening the South. Pressing the North by threatening them has not worked. It's not going to work, particularly if they think they're about to go down the tubes. They're less amenable to any compromise. We've given them a package which I support. I think it's a wise thing to do, to give them incentives to behave better. But what we really need to do is strengthen the South. I think we need a free trade agreement if the South becomes independent to strengthen the Southern economy, tie it to the U.S. economy. I think, frankly, we need a large American embassy to show them we're staying in Juba with a large military assistance mission